you are very involved in achieving, I don't know what we call it, a higher degree of election integrity in Georgia. What are you guys doing, or what have you done since the last election and the time that Georgians will go to vote this time?
Yeah, so there's several things that have taken place since the last election. I think we're talking presidential, which would be 2020. We did have an election in 2022, and there's some changes that have been made since then as well. But you heard of SB 202, which separated the state election board from the Secretary of State's office. And then SB 189 took the Secretary of State off the board as chairman of the board and completely allowed us to become an independent, separate entity. And so we're going through the growing pains of becoming a completely independent of the Secretary of State's office. But as a result of that, the board has shifted, has changed a bit. I was appointed to the board in June of this year by our Speaker of the House, Speaker John Burns. I'm so grateful for him for this opportunity. And since then, we have reviewed several new rules and proposals and proposed rules that we had to vote on and kind of decide whether or not to send it into rulemaking. And we have sent some rules into rulemaking that has stirred up a bit of controversy. Not quite sure why, and I'm sure we can get into that a little bit more. However, those rules are definitely being highly debated right now. But
so what's like that? My big passion right now is making sure that only people who should vote vote. What are you guys doing in that area?
Oh, 100%. So we recently passed a policy, or I would say a rule, not a policy, but a rule that stated that every precinct has to have a sign up that says all U.S. citizens, only U.S. citizens can vote. And this is obviously to deter illegal immigrants and those who are here illegal from voting in our election. We're also making sure that we are looking at these voter rolls, not specifically, but we are working with our counties, and our counties are looking to ensure that illegal immigrants are not voting in this election. Currently, the rule stands that if someone was to sign up to register to vote and their registration is pending because they were not able to provide proof of citizenship, if they came to the polling place, they would then be told that they could not vote unless they have that proof of citizenship. There are some counties that we're trying to make sure that this is not a problem or this is not something that's happening on a uniform level. But I have heard of some counties potentially issuing provisional ballots, but that's something that we are looking into to ensure that everyone is operating on the same page and that no one receives any ballot of any sort if they have not shown that they are legal citizens.
I know that President Trump has been very supportive of your efforts and what's going on. Why was there a need to break away from the Secretary of State's office?
Well, after the 2020 election cycle, I think that was kind of where the, metal hit the road, I guess, because there was a time where prior to 2020 and 2018, where Stacey Abrams really started this whole conversation around election integrity. Her race, when she ran for governor, she felt like her results were unfair and were not correct. And so she challenged them. We also saw Sarah Amico Riggs, who was a Democrat that ran against Jeff Duncan, who was the Republican at the time, Republican lieutenant governor. And she also challenged it. So it started in 2018 from what we've seen. And then in 2020, it's when President Trump's race was challenged and he challenged his results. I mean, which I think is rightfully so. It's particularly looking at how close his race was. And in doing so, it turned into a huge thing. And I believe that SB 202 was put in place because there were some issues. There were some things that the people, those elected officials saw that needed to be addressed. And those issues were addressed in SB 202. But the separation of the board was simply because a lot of the stuff that comes before us, we hear complaints from people around elections all across the state. And when you say things to us that could potentially show that there's some SOS or Secretary of State involvement, it's important that there is a separation. The state election board cannot also be the board that is evaluating these concerns, but also working alongside the Secretary of State's office. So to me, I believe the decision was to create a barrier, to create some type of checks and balances and oversight of our election process so that we don't see ourselves in this position again.
Democrats are really targeting Georgia. The Harris team thinks that they can really win there and take your 16 electoral votes. Will we know on election night who the winner is in Georgia?
That is certainly the hope and the plan, is that everything can be done smoothly and that we will know who the winner is of Georgia on election night. However, one of the things that I am personally trying to do, particularly when it comes to the voters of Georgia, is I really want to shift our mindset from moving into a space where we're only focusing on speed and we're not focusing on accuracy. I think in the past that has caused a lot of challenges. We had counties that felt like they had to rush and provide data, and then that leaves room for human error. So while there is a certification process that can take place over the course of a few days leading up to the Monday following that election day, I want to make sure that not only are we developing or producing speedy results, but we're also producing accurate results. So it is my hope that we'll know that on election night.
If you're a voter in Georgia and you were concerned about how 2020 was conducted for whatever reason, should you feel better right now about the work that you guys have been doing in the lead up to 2024?
Oh, absolutely. I feel that the work that we are doing is very organized and systematic. And what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of the rules have come before us, and these are rules that are proposed by election officials. These are not rules that we are just making up or coming up with ourselves. These are rules that our election officials have put in place. They've asked us to consider them as ways to ensure that our election process is stronger, secure, and accurate. And so, as in doing that, we realized that there were certain rules that I felt personally would provide a ground up approach. What I've seen in the past and what I've noticed and learned over the course of being on this board is that oftentimes there are individuals who feel like we should address problems on the back end. And then there are those who feel like we need to address it in the moment. And that, I believe, is where the contention lies. I'm one of those people who believe that we need to address it in the moment.
Yeah.
If there is
Wait, after the fact, who cares?
I know. And then it becomes a lot difficult, right? You have
Right.
people who
Yeah.
are waiting years and years for a court date. So,
Right.
and then the results are in and people are already elected and just it moves on. So,
Right. That's
um,
the beauty of like these guys are always like, well, let's see what happens. And it's like, you mean after everyone votes and then you can't undo it? Yeah, that part. Right.
exactly.
It,
So the rules that I believe that the two rules that are being heavily debated is one that requires precincts to count the ballots that they have in hand on election day to ensure that those ballots match the number of voters that have walked through the door. Basic
crazy.
common sense.
Yeah. It's funny. I was listening to the Michigan Republican chairman the other day, and he said there are more registered voters in Michigan than eligible. And you do the math and you go, that doesn't make sense. There shouldn't be more. And this is, to your point, Democrats are like, well, let's see what happens. I
Right.
want to ask you one last thing. It's interesting. There was a story in the New York Times that said the following, but in the aftermath of the 2020 election, Georgia's Republican-led legislature passed an integrity law that permitted any registered voter to file an unlimited number of challenges. The law required election clerks to schedule hearings and to send up to 4 letters to each voter in question, which meant that thousands of letters were sent, blah, blah, blah. Is this an effective tool that's being used in Georgia, or the left is as the left is contending this is a waste?
As it relates to being able to submit their complaints to
Yeah.
us. Oh, it's interesting. So that's another reason why we are working not just to establish these rules around the election process, but to also establish rules around the SEB board and our new standing. Because I do think that there should be an avenue, which there is, but I think it should be more publicly advertised, an avenue where people can complain directly to us rather than going through the Secretary of State's
Right.
office. I think it kind of creates a little bit of confusion. It doesn't allow people to see us as separate. So there is there's an email address that I send out to people who want to submit directly to us. It's to our paralegal, but I definitely encourage us to, at some point, develop a website so that we can receive complaints directly.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.